Hey friends, welcome to week two. It was nice getting to know you last week, and we're going to jump into our third day of lecturing. This is for May 26th, but since that's Memorial Day, you're welcome to watch this on the 27th. In fact, I've got the quiz due, it's quiz number 4 due to on May 27th so that it doesn't interfere with the holiday. Today, we're going to be talking about internal validity and different sources of bias that come up in studies of social psychology. And with these lectures, again, this is really supposed to be there to help you improve your final papers and make them more informed. So these might be things that come up in your discussion section or when you're talking about your research design. So let's get into internal validity first. What is it? It's the extent to which a causal relationship, like we learned last Wednesday, a causal relationship means that A makes B happen. Uh, it's the causal relationship. How much is it attributable to the independent variable and not some third variable? Okay. What's our confidence level in that the independent variable is the only thing that's causing the dependent variable to change? Could it be some third variable? This is where random assignment really comes in to help because in theory, random assignment should be equalizing people on all extraneous third variables out there in the world. But maybe there's some doubts that are cast on that. So let's take, for example, the extent that we can say Shaq's skills made the ball go into the hoop. If we've got any NBA fans out there, I get really into the NBA around this time of year because it's playoff season and I enjoy watching that. But if we got any NBA fans, you know that Shaq was really bad at free throws. In fact, he's really only good at shooting the ball from like maybe a foot or two away from the hoop. Um, so what things could get in the way of his skill making that ball go into the hoop? Maybe it could be the wind. Maybe it could be luck. Um, Internal validity is a measure of confidence. It's a measure of confidence. How confident are we in saying that the skill made the ball go into the basket? There's another type of validity that's related to internal validity called construct validity. And this is the extent to which your experimental manipulation actually captures the construct. And you can't have internal validity if you don't have construct validity. So going back to our example of ostracism, Jean Twenge from San Diego State University designed a manipulation uh, where she told people that later on in life, they were going to be essentially living a life alone. And as you read through this, you can pause so you don't have to hear me talking. You can read through it. You're going to see that maybe this isn't ostracism by itself that Twenge is manipulating. What other constructs could it be? Well, it could be loneliness, I think, which is different from ostracism. Ostracism is intentionally ignoring or excluding somebody, whereas loneliness well, might come along with ostracism, but it's not necessarily the same construct. So since we don't know what construct this is measuring, how could we ever say that we know the independent variables affecting the dependent variable? We can't. So here's a story about someone's journey in internal validity, and his last name is Barry, and he published this research that I'm about to talk with you about back in 2018. And yeah, you're actually not going to have to read any of these studies for lab report 2 because lab report 2 does not exist in this class. Don't say that I never did you any favors. When in the full 15-week semester, I make students do 2 lab reports. You all only have to do 1. You're welcome, right? So in this study, I wanted to learn if mindfulness was associated with pro-social behavior. And I wanted to set up a causal relationship. So in a study with undergraduate students from Virginia Commonwealth University, I put them into one of 2 conditions. They were asked to listen to over headphones, either a mindfulness audio recording or an active control that encouraged them to think about urgent goals in their life. After that, they watched somebody getting excluded in the cyberball ball tossing game. They didn't actually play themselves. They watched this go down. And then they were asked to write an email to the other players in the game. Okay. And then they were loaded into the game themselves. And we measured how many times they threw the ball to the person who was just excluded. So it's a measure of re-including them into the game. So what we found was that mindfulness trainees wrote more comforting emails. These emails were coded by people who were not aware of the conditions that folks were in. And we asked if they threw the ball more to the exclusion victim. And we found that mindfulness trainees, as opposed to the attention-based control, threw the ball more. Or in other words, they were being nicer. So I thought right away, I was like, this is really cool. I think we need to go publish this. And my advisor said, oh, no, 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 you've got a threat to internal validity in your study. Now, remember, internal validity is the confidence in which we can say that mindfulness caused people to be more pro-social. So the threat to internal validity here is that we actually don't know if the mindfulness group increased pro-social behavior or if the attention group decreased it. We could run a pre-test, post-test design, but that wouldn't work very well because the participants would become aware that we were trying to get them to feel empathy. So we designed another experiment, but this time there was a third group, and the third group was not given any instructions at all. They were just loaded into the game. Okay. And the hypothesis was that mindfulness would outperform both these groups. But if we found that mindfulness was the same as this inactive control, and the active control was lower than both of those groups, that would tell us that no, mindfulness isn't doing anything at all. That's actually the attention group that was doing something, and it was reducing empathy. So we found the hypothesized pattern of effects. It seemed like mindfulness was actually increasing pro-social behavior versus the attention control decreasing it. And we found this for both the throw data and for the email helping behavior. And I thought, again, these are cool findings. And my advisor at the time agreed, and we submitted this paper for publication. And then we got reviews from the editor and the reviewers, peer reviewers. And one of our reviewers was worried that we didn't rule out relaxation as a possible variable. Now, meditation exercises are very relaxing, and this reviewer thought that relaxation would help people to become more pro-social. Now, knowing what I know about the literature, that didn't make any sense at all. But it seemed reasonable that we should try to rule out this concern. So we ran one more study, and this time instead of the attention control, we had people doing a progressive muscle relaxation. Um, and we found the exact same results as before. So in other words, it wasn't the relaxation that was making people more helpful, it was the mindfulness. So so this eventually got published in 2018, and we were really excited about this work, but there were still some threats to internal validity that were in there. So maybe some of you have heard about meditation being linked to compassion and kindness. Prior to me mentioning this in class, there's articles out there that people have access to. And what if this message being in the popular media made it so that when people heard the mindfulness audio, they thought, oh, I'm in a meditation experiment. And then they were presented with something nice to do for somebody else, and they didn't behave that way because of the mindfulness. They behaved compassionately because they thought that's what mindfulness was supposed to make them do. Or in other words, they were just trying to appease the experimenter. Not good. That's not what we want. We want the mindfulness to be the active ingredient, not the participants' expectations. So with this in mind, we did a completely separate study that was published in 2021, where we created a fake meditation group. Here, we told everybody that they were getting a meditation, but there was only one real meditation group. The other group were led to believe that they were meditating, but they really weren't. So we ended up finding similar results again in this study. And I tell you this as a as a way to say that internal validity is not an absolute. It's not something that you have. It's a process. It's something that you work toward. And these studies that I've shown you represent years of work where we had to go back and rethink, okay, this thing was not ruled out, so now we need to try it a different way. So I want to talk to you about the social psychology of participating in an experiment. And one thing that you should be aware of is that your participants, for the most part, are aware that they are in an experiment. This might not be the case in the field studies you design, but we need to consider the situation that we're creating as a psychological problem. So participants know they're in an experiment, and a lot of times our participants are familiar with psychology studies. So for example, if you took Psych 121 here at Radford, you probably participated in experiments on Sona, and you started to become familiar with psychological studies. Maybe they were using deception. Maybe there was an opportunity for you to respond in ways that were socially desirable. So let's talk about some common families of threats to internal validity. One is weak study designs. So take, for example, the Zimbardo study. I'll let you watch that on your own. But this prison experiment we're all familiar with. In this study, they picked up participants who were not necessarily randomly assigned. They were given the chance to choose whether they were going to be a guard or a prisoner. The people who participated as prisoners were picked up by a real law enforcement group, handcuffed, put into the back of a police cruiser, and driven to the basement of Stanford where this study was conducted. And in it, there was really no standard protocol. Zimbardo just kind of wanted to see what the participants would do. Would they take on these social roles? So yeah, there's some ethical issues with this study. But the big ones that come out are that there's no control group, there was no random assignment, and there was really no experimental protocol. Um, and this happens sometimes in studies where we want participants to act more freely. But even in most cases, my studies, I have a very detailed script and it tells the experimenters what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to guide the participants through the study. Here they didn't have that, and it made it so that they were not truly able to see the effects uh, or truly know the effects of the independent variable, the social role that participants were assigned on their behavior. There's even been some stuff that's come out where some of the Zimbardo participants said that they were faking. Um, this experiment was pretty intense. It was supposed to go on for 2 weeks, and they stopped it after 6 days. But this highlights a problem that comes up in research sometimes. There's issues with specificity or standardization in the protocol. When I was first doing the cyberball studies, a lot of participants were asking my experimenters, hey, what am I supposed to write about in these emails to the players? It's kind of weird. And we had not standardized what we said to participants if they asked that question. And so the experimenters brought it up to me during a lab meeting when we were piloting this study. And I said, oh, okay, I know what we've got to do. Let's tell them at the start of the study that they're going to be writing these emails and that they can write about whatever they want. But most people just write about the details of the game. And that seemed to help with that standardization because my experimenters had no idea what to tell these participants when they asked this question. And you don't want your experimenters to be guessing about what comes next. Not a good place to be. So some remedies for this are to standardize your experiment. You can give your experimenters a script. You can do pilot testing to find holes in the plot, the story that you're telling your participants, especially if you're doing deception. We don't want experimenters guessing or having to make decisions about what to do next. Also, training your experimenters is a good practice. I have as many as 10 training sessions prior to collecting data. Um, and you can also make your experimenters an independent variable in your statistical tests. So these experimenters could have effects on your data. A second family of problems refers to experimenter biases. These are biases held by the experimenter themselves that threaten the internal validity of the study. So we're all familiar with clever Hans. Hans was not very good at math, although people thought that he was. Hans was actually much better at identifying nonverbal behaviors in the people who fed him and took care of him. And he was essentially asked to tap on this board that you see the number that math problem was put in front of him equal to. And he was noticing that like nonverbal behaviors, like his owner nodding or something like that, and associating that with awards, rewards that he'd seen received in the past. And really, the people who were being experimented on wasn't this horse here. It was the folks in the audience themselves. Okay, so here the experimenter, so to speak, were drawing the behavior out of this horse. So what do you see on the screen in front of you? Is this dress black and blue or is it white and gold? I see it as white and gold. but maybe some of you see it as black and blue. Okay, and this meme has now passed year 10 of its existence. And what I think it tells us is that through our perceptual systems, we have very different views of things that we see right in front of our face. Like, for example, do you see a younger woman or an older woman here? The older woman, you've got a nose here. This is her eye. Maybe that's her other eyelash. This is a mouth, an elongated chin here. Whereas if you're seeing a younger woman, this is her cheekbone and the outline of her chin. This is an ear. Maybe that's the eyelash and she's turned away. We're looking at the same image, but maybe you see this a little bit differently. The thing here to remember is that human perception is multimodal, and sometimes we can see things that the mind creates and wants us to see. Okay, so if I know the hypotheses for study, I might see behavior that isn't really there. This is why we masked researchers who were coding the emails to the condition that participants were in. So one form of this is expectancy bias. When the experimenters know what the study's about, they tend to draw the behavior out of participants that they want to see. So some ways to work around this are double blinding, or what we call double masking. Now, this is a term that's appearing more and more. And this is where participants and experimenters don't know which group participants are being randomized to. And this doesn't always work, though. Eventually, experimenters might figure out what groups people are in based on the things that are happening during the study. Another form of experimenter bias that comes out is called confirmation bias. This is where we look at information in a way that makes it more probable that will be correct. Okay, so this might be internet research that you perform, and there's you're not actually doing research. Maybe you're just doing a Google search. One issue that Jonathan Haidt has raised is that in the field of social psychology, people tend to lean a little bit more politically liberal than they'd lean toward political conservatism. And Haidt says that this is a problem because maybe people are letting their political biases creep into their research. And this is causing them to design studies that will support their hypotheses. Or in other words, support their political ideology. The thing about this, though, is that psychologists, we're all trained in these biases, and we're aware that we all have them. Whether you're liberal or conservative, or some other kind of political approach that fits a description for you, all of those are biases, and in training about these, we can learn how to rule them out and control for them. So we don't actually see any bias creeping into these studies, or in other words, it's not that psychologists are designing studies that are more liberally oriented. So some remedies for this confirmation bias is first doing studies with people who you disagree with. And this can be a really fruitful type of project to do, where if you disagree with somebody, you all can design studies where if one group could be right or the other group could be right. And it helps us to rule out biases in the research that we're doing. Another approach that we use is peer review. And this is where we have people who are experts in the field review the work that we've done. This can help to rule out confirmation bias. A third type of study, threat to internal validity, that comes up are characteristics of your experimenters. So this could be their age, race, ethnicity, personality variables like their level of anxiety. They can all have an effect on the dependent variable. So one story that comes up from this is we actually had a confound in an experiment one time where we were doing a mindfulness versus a health enhancement intervention. The health enhancement was the control. And in the mindfulness group, the person who was facilitating that was very calm, okay with participants showing up late, things like that. It was a very relaxed group. Now, this worked great for our population who were adults between the age of 65 to 85. Um, they're all retired, they're doing their thing. Now, in the other condition, the health enhancement program, this guy was really nice. Like I enjoyed working with him. Um, but he was a Marine and he had a very strict way of facilitating his group. And he, held tight to his schedule. He was not very open to people showing up late, things like that. And we were not able to figure out if it was the manipulation that caused changes in the dependent variable, or if it was the people facilitating the groups that caused changes. This is a confound because it's perfectly married to the dependent variable. So some remedies to this: you can disclose your experimenter characteristics in papers. Who were they? I do this all the time. Um, and you can use your experimenters as independent variables in your analyses as well. So here in part two, what we're going to do is talk about biases that belong to the participant. Previously, we talked about biases that belong to the experimenter. And sometimes these biases even interact with experimenter biases. So there's a few different types of participants that we might encounter in a research study. So participants are really motivated, they're attentive, they're intelligent, they want to do your study, they want to figure out what's going on. And so sometimes they'll adopt roles. The most common participant is the apprehensive one. These are people who are worried that you're evaluating them. Okay, like our child here in the car seat. Sorry about the language there, but this is a college class and you all can handle it. This is the most common participant. They tend to respond dishonestly because they think that they're being evaluated. So they try to respond in favorable ways that make them look favorable. They may not want to answer uncomfortable questions. Sometimes they'll even change their answers. This is not good because we want the participants to be giving as honest answers as they possibly can. Another type of participant that comes up occasionally is the good participant. This is like the teacher's pet participant. They try to appease the experimenter and confirm their hypotheses. Whoops, let's go back. This should be obvious. The participants figuring out their hypotheses and they're behaving in ways to try to confirm them. Uh-oh. We've also got the negativistic participant. This is what I referred to as the FU participant when I was in graduate school. These are really rare. And they find out your hypotheses or they figure them out and they try to behave in ways that are the opposite. And then we have what we call the faithful participants. The faithful participant is like me when I played hide and seek with my kids when they were really young. They're older now, so this wouldn't work anymore. But like my youngest daughter would be standing like up against the wall and covering her eyes like this dog here. And I would just play like I didn't see her at all. Like, what's going on over here? These participants kind of do the same thing. They'll say that they know what the study's about, but they're just not going to let that affect them. They're not going to act on their presuppositions. So, some remedies that we have for this apprehensive participant, the most common one, are telling them that there's no evaluation in the study at all. We can use and this pilot test our deceptions, and then we can do our debriefing really well. You need to let them know why you deceived them. If you don't, you're going to make them upset. And they'll tell other people about it. That's the quickest way to ruin a deception study is debriefing poorly. Okay. And then another type of participant effect that comes up is when it interacts with the independent variable manipulation. Now, remember, participants are really attentive. They're worried about being evaluated. And so sometimes our conditions, try as we might to avoid this, have cues in them that are present, but not present in other conditions. And this cues our very attentive participants into behaving a way that is disingenuous. So another story that comes up uh, is that there's different types of meditation than just mindfulness. There's compassion-based forms of meditation, and I've had folks ask me, hey, why don't you use these compassion-based forms? They'll probably affect compassion more than mindfulness would. And yeah, that makes pretty good sense. But the problem with that is these manipulations, these meditations, quite literally tell people how to be compassionate. And then if we put them in a situation where they could act compassionately, uh, that has a cue in it, that condition that the other conditions don't have. Uh-oh, not good. This is called a demand characteristic. And it happens when one condition, but not others, have a cue that essentially demands your participants to respond in a certain way. Some remedies for this, you can ask people after the study what they thought it was about. Hopefully there's no differences between participants on what they thought the study was about. Pre-inquiry, you can actually do the study prior to as like a pilot test where you tell the participants in this pilot the procedures that are going to happen and then ask them what the study's about. And then another type of pilot testing you can do is simulation where you train the participants on what the study is about and then have them go through the whole procedure. And here you have them try to spot cues that would give away the experimenter's aims. A final set of biases that I want to talk about are after the experiment is done. Sometimes we have unintentional errors after the experiment is done. And one error that comes up a lot is software compatibility issues, coding errors, things like that. So sometimes missing data is coded differently in Microsoft Excel than it is in SPSS. So if you do all of your data processing in Excel, like I do, and then you don't account for these software differences, you might get some wildly different results. Or some coding errors. Sometimes we might end up mistyping our data if we're entering it in by hand. Uh-oh. This is why it's good to look at frequency tables. If I have a scale that ranges from 1 to 5, I shouldn't see any sixes in that frequency table. If there are, it means that somebody entered the data incorrectly. Uh, so another type of error that comes up, or it's software compatibility issues. Um, be careful when you're averaging scales in SPSS. It calculates missing data as a zero. So you have to tell SPSS that those data are missing. And it can make for very wildly different scores. So again, this kind of fits under the compatibility issues. So some remedies for this are don't use pen and paper surveys. Use online surveys where the participants click the buttons and you're not going to make any errors, right? You just download the data and you see what they input. Um, and then you always have to know your limitations of the software, how it works. Uh, I'm asking you to be smarter than a computer here. You are smarter than a computer. So just make sure that you remember that. Then there's different types of intentional errors that you can make. Um, let's just not even call these errors. These are things that'll get you kicked out of science. They're not errors. They're intentional, unethical behaviors, like falsifying your data, or in other words, making it up, uh, or you know, looking at your data in such a way that stacks the deck in your favor. And then fabrication, that would be making up your data. Um, don't do these things. The remedy to this is just to be an honest scientist. So with that, you all can complete quiz number 4 by tonight. Best of luck to you.